Fuck it, we're going.
You are listening to the F11 Photography Podcast.
To the chasers of light, to the purveyors of pictures, to all of you listening, this is the F11 Photography Podcast.
Good morning, Vietnam.
Yes, good morning. How are you doing today, Brandon?
Oh, man, what a day. What a day. I've been awake for approximately 26 minutes.
Yes, Brandon did get here today. So what you been up to lately?
Lately, we've been taking photos of people, Kevin. We just saw Jeff Mills recently, actually, and that was a lot of fun. Legendary 90s, what was it, Detroit techno god.
Pretty awesome.
Coming to Austin, Texas. He's not a photographer. He's not a photographer, but he is a DJ.
You should have taken his picture, man.
I did with my phone.
Right on. Well, my core body temperature is kind of cold right now. I got scuba certified yesterday in the waters of Lake Travis. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the Austin area, we have a Colorado River here, and it's not the Colorado River that powers the western United States. We have our own Colorado River because, in Texas we have to have our own everything. So we have a bunch of lakes that are dammed off, and they have Lake Travis there, and there's not a lot of good scuba diving places in the middle of Texas. Shocker. And even if you go to the Gulf, it's just a bunch of mud and jellyfish. And the instructor was telling me, like, hey, so we're going to go down to like 40 feet. And there's this thing called the thermocline, which if you're familiar with the atmosphere and weather, as you change in different parts of the atmosphere, the temperature changes drastically. Well, that's the same with water. And I went down to the thermocline, and when you go down on the thermocline, it's like putting your head in a frozen margarita. So like I was wearing a wetsuit, a 7mm wetsuit, and you have your mask on and you have your hood on, but there's just like this tiny little exposed part on your forehead. And it's the worst brain freeze ever, dude. It goes away after a few minutes, but it is miserable. And all this is leading up to a scuba trip in the Florida Keys, so it's all going to be great, and it's going to be like 90-degree water and everything, so I'm looking forward to it. That's what I've been up to lately.
Sounds like winter surfing in California. You duck dive under a wave and you get an immediate brain freeze.
Yes, however, no great white sharks and no crazy surf to pull me with an undertow and take me out and drown me, so those surfers are crazy, man. But anyway, let's get to the episode. Today's episode, sending the ladder back down. Now, this is something that can apply to all parts of your life. It doesn't necessarily have to apply to just photography, but it is something that is very big in photography, something that happens. And what am I talking about when I'm talking about sending the ladder back down? So as we grow as photographers, some of us are incredibly talented, and we work hard, and success comes our way. Some of us are talented, and success falls in our lap, and because we are equipped correctly, we have the skills to pounce on a situation. In those situations, of course, I applaud those people, and I'm happy for them. And then there's other people who, over time, gain experience, like myself, like I have experience just by being around long enough, and so this concept of sending the ladder back down. So when I was coming up, and this is still something that people do today, but like people will not share their secrets. They will not help those out who are trying to learn. They will not share their success with others. They will not share their connections with others. They will not share their shoot locations with others. I had a photographer once. So I'm a dork. I don't know if you got the memo, but like sometimes like on my Instagram stories, I'll just like plug in a latitude and a longitude for my shoot location. Let's work for it, right? And some guy was like, hey, where was this shot? Or, you don't have to tell me. You don't have to tell me. He's like super fast on the, oh, you don't have to tell me where you shot it. I'm like, I'll tell you where I shot it. Like, what are you so afraid of? But, people, I guess, are afraid of getting, squashed and like, just, hey, I don't want to share my secrets with you. And I don't know if it comes from, people's fear that like, oh, you're going to steal my clientele or whatever. And that's something else. It's like, if you are going to lose clients because you tell other photographers the things you know about photography, then you have much larger problems at hand, because that means that you suck at business or whatever, and you cannot maintain your clientele. And so that's kind of the episode I want to talk about today. Is the subject I want to talk about today is, sending the ladder back down, examples of when you should send the ladder back down. And obviously, I love the fact that we're almost 20 years apart, so I can get a different perspective on it. But when I was coming up, like, these old grizzled photographers were just like, hell no, I'm not teaching you anything. Which the only way you can navigate around that would be by being a intern for a really awesome photographer. So
by tying them up, and beating them in a low lit room.
Yes. So what's the landscape like for your age group these days, Brandon?
To be honest, I haven't actually encountered the problem the problem. I guess there's a Freudian slip that shows what I think about sending the ladder back down. No, in my generation, a lot of people are very happy to send the ladder back down. In fact, I think it's more of a conscious thing on our minds, is that when someone does ask for help in photography or for a location or for like this model's like, how did they shoot, or like, what was it like working with this person? I think a lot of people actually overshare. I think they're very much aware that there is that idea of sending the ladder back down, and they don't want to be the person that doesn't do it.
So if I have an up-and-coming photographer say, hey, I know nothing, teach me everything, I could literally give them my camera, teach them everything that I know, even give them my clients. And they would not take pictures that look like my pictures. They would take pictures that look a little different than my pictures, because that is the thing about the artistic eye, is that, if it were that simple, a lot of our pictures would look the same. And we have our own artistic eye. We may maybe change our angle a little bit or whatever, and it makes the picture look completely different. And so I just think it's ridiculous. And I don't know if it's I don't know if it's a generational thing, because I do see this sometimes with the older generation, and this is going to be a commentary on a generation that can apply across all walks of life, not just photography, but like I see this all the time. You get these older people who make fun of younger people. And as somebody who's 42, I'm starting to get into the older people category, and this drives me crazy, especially when it's like a parent. So like I saw this video on YouTube where these older people were laughing at their daughter because she didn't know how to use a rotary phone. And I was like, well, first and foremost, your daughter's never had to use a rotary phone. And second of all, whose job is it to teach their daughter how to use the rotary phone? Her fucking parents, who are making fun of her. It's like, and so, and when those situations arise, you need to not be a jerk about it. So like in our last episode, our interview with Jason Berkman, we were talking about the process of making prints. And you came into this point where you were like, hey, I'm admittedly ignorant about how to make prints because I don't have an enlarger and I've never done it before. And so rather than Brandon and I go, let's all laugh at Brandon because he doesn't know how to make prints, we just explained to you how we did it.
It was a simple 5-minute process.
Yeah. So it's like you have two roads you can go down. You can leave people with knowledge and you can die a better person, or you can say, screw you, I'm keeping all my toys. And then you know what that person's going to go do? They're going to go learn how to do it on YouTube anyway. And the only walk away from that is that you're an asshole and that they still like got to where they needed to get. And so when I was coming up, there was no YouTube. And so it was easier to guard your secrets. But nowadays, first and foremost, most people's quote unquote secrets aren't even like there's nothing amazing about them. It's just, I didn't learn this thing yet. Right. And it also, and I don't want to get stuck in the generational thing and the years of knowledge thing, because it goes the other way. So when I was finishing up my degree, there was one semester of Photoshop, InDesign, and what's the other one? Photoshop, InDesign, and what am I?
Illustrator?
Illustrator, thank you. I've only had one cup of coffee, and it's the morning we're recording. So, but we only had one semester. So in my entire education, formal education of photography, I got one very condensed semester of those 3 programs because film was still king then. And so it was like this new concept. Now I'm assuming like now one of the best ways you can make money in photography is not even being a photographer, it's being a retoucher. And so, I know so many photographers who are super talented, but they make 90% of their money retouching. And you don't learn that in just a semester of Photoshop classes. You probably have to get a certification that takes several semesters to get. And so my point being there is,
plus that's not even like certifiable. That's about learning how to see.
Yeah, exactly.
Learning how to see color.
Yeah, and then but my point there is everybody knows something that you don't. And so as I'm getting older, I'm like, hey, take a step back and like listen to what the younger generation is saying about things and what the concepts that they're learning, and see if you can take something from that and put that notch on your belt.
There's a lot of things where you should definitely pass the ladder down. Like you said, you could give someone your camera and you can teach them everything you know about photography, and obviously they're not going to create the same photo. However, I do think there is a gray area. Like if someone wanted to learn how to edit, so let's say you develop your own very like specific editing style and you go through your own flow and stuff like that. For a lot of people, their photos are post-production, like super post-production heavy, like that's their identity, and that's how you can tell what their photos are. Maybe they go for a more HDR effect, or maybe they go for a more like mid-range effect and they shoot very dark and bring everything up to around the mid-range level where there's not a lot of contrast, and then they use like let's say they just use pinks and greens in a lot of their photos or something like that. And you could teach someone who's just learning how to shoot like your whole editing style from top to bottom, because say you're the type of person that likes to use like 13 layers on Photoshop to come to an image, or you use a specific like style of preset on Lightroom and then take it into Photoshop and then have a process there, or vice versa. I think sending the ladder back down in that regard could be a little bit, I don't know. I wouldn't want someone copying me. They wouldn't be producing the same thing, but it's taken me years and years and years to learn how to use and compound different techniques on Photoshop, because obviously there's multiple ways to skin a cat. You can achieve a look on Photoshop and Lightroom through, in many different ways, and baking out your own formula after years and years of using it is something that's really unique to you. And it's not a secret as well, but it's sending the ladder back down and like telling someone how to edit to achieve this certain look. If it's your look and that's the look that defines you in a space, in a marketable space, I do think that's kind of a gray area where I'd show people how to achieve the look they're wanting to go for. Like if they ask me like, hey, like I want to do this with a photo, I don't know how to get there. I just learned how to, just open Photoshop. How do I get this look? If it's not my look, by all means, I'll help them. But if they're trying to achieve what I'm just doing on a daily basis, I'd probably just say, hey, like I'll help you with anything else, but I just don't want someone copying me right now.
Sure. Yeah, well, but even then, like you could teach me your entire editing style, but if I shoot in a completely different style with lenses that see a little differently and all that, even if I try to edit in your style, it's still going to look a little different.
I know. I that's the funny thing is I know that's totally true, and I hear where you're coming from, but it's the principle, because, and I've seen this happen over time, is when I started getting to a place in digital photography where I was just like, oh, okay, like I really like where this is going, and I can kind of springboard off of this into the future. It was like my first level of like sustainable good edits that I'd come to in as a photographer. And there was someone who wasn't even shooting as a photographer at the time who was a big fan of my work on Instagram. And when they started shooting, when they decided to pick up a camera, all their photos looked like mine for about a year and a half.
But it was a phase.
It was a phase, but it irked me. I didn't like it.
See, when I was your age, I was the same way. I'd be like, stop copying me. But then as I've gotten older, I realized that, okay, but if somebody copies me, what are the consequences? Are they going to take my clients? Nope, because I'm in charge of my clientele. And what they're doing, first of all, it's a compliment. But what they're doing is they're figuring out what you did. Usually this is what happens. They're figuring out what you did so they can now take it and take it into a direction where they're going to go. So they're learning something you did, but then they go, okay, now I'm going to go do my own thing with it over here. And then I'm going to take this other thing that this other person did. And I see emulation all the time. I've emulated other photographers. And so as long as it's a phase, I don't see that being an issue. If it's a phase, what that's telling me without even talking to them is they were just really going through a thing in development where they're like, okay, now I've absorbed the lesson that Brandon has taught me. Now I'm going to go do my own thing.
That doesn't seem realistic. You see, emulating like someone like Helmut Newton or emulating Tyler Shields emulating Helmut Newton, that's more approachable. Emulating someone who's been in MoMA or like has their photo books published at the Met, like that makes more sense. But emulating someone who lives, a number of miles away from you, that's kind of a stretch,
You think so?
I kind of do. That doesn't make sense to me. With the world and the information age the way it is, it seems kind of unnecessary.
I don't know, man. Like I said, I still dig in that I think that if they're not emulating you anymore, then it was a phase and it was just something that they were learning and putting a feather in their cap. But
I might be a contrarian this early in the morning without caffeine, but yeah, I do think the editing style is one thing, but everything else completely open to locations. In fact, I encourage it. In fact, if people even mention that they might have interests, but they seem like they don't want to ask the question out of like politeness, I go ahead and tell them. I tell them location. I give them model information after asking the model and stuff like that. I give them like props if they need props. I tell them what lenses I'm using. I tell them what camera I'm using. I tell them how I'm shooting, what time of day, where the sun's facing, if they all that sort of stuff.
You are listening to the F11 Photography Podcast.
So when I was younger, if I saw some like photograph that another photographer took that is really good, I don't know, I might get that little jealous bug in me, like, you like, damn it. But what you're really telling yourself is, I wish I'd taken that shot. That's really that's what that feeling is. And so now that I'm a little older and I understand that feeling, I'm like, well, okay, rather than being jealous about that, like just praise them and go, man, that's a great shot. And that's it. Like, that's it. Like I had an opportunity to be a dick and I decided not to be a dick. Awesome. The models you work with in your town are going to work with other photographers, and other photographers are going to take really awesome pictures of those exact models. And of course, that inner artist in you is like, shit, I haven't taken a picture of that model that well. And then you're going to be like, what am I doing wrong? And you have this internal dialogue, and it's okay. There's other complexities to that we'll get into in another episode. Sometimes you're just not compatible with a model. The two of you cannot connect the way another photographer can. I've seen models that you've worked with that I've worked with. I'm like, he connects better with that model. Okay, great. I don't go, shit, Brandon, fuck Brandon. I'm just like, cool.
It'd be okay if you did though, Kevin.
No, I'm good. I have a buddy who codes for IBM, and like, for the longest time, I could never like really wrap my head around the world of coding. I was like, it just seems so complex. He's like, it's really not complex because a bunch of people did the work before us and we just build on it. So it's like, it looks like I had this complex string of code, but like 90% of it was done over years by somebody else and we just take and build on it. And that kind of made me step back and reflect. And so it's like, the people who don't want to share their secrets, they tend to have this mentality that I hear in the world, whereas, well, you know what? I suffered, so you have to suffer too. And what they don't realize, the irony of it is you did suffer. You suffered so badly that your takeaway from suffering was that other people had to suffer, not that I'm going to learn from my suffering and make sure that the next generation doesn't have to suffer as I did. And I'm going to try to make the world a better place for them. So yes, you did suffer, but not in the way you thought. you suffered because your takeaway was wrong. And as I've gotten, and there was this like small period of my life where I felt that way too. But then as I've gotten a little older and reflected, I'm like, no. Make the world a better place for the people. Make it easier. Like, I had to suffer to come up with this editing style, and I finally figured it out. And it's, to me, like where I'm at now, it's like, I'll just tell you, like, here's my Photoshop actions, and like please don't make your shit look like my shit, okay? But this is how I did it. And if you want to take that and take it into whatever direction you want to take it into, great. Because at the end of the day, I have control over my clientele. I have control over my own work, and if somebody wants to copy me, good for them. That doesn't mean that they're as good with clients as I am. And even if they use the same clients that I use, I can still maintain my clients because I have that part of my life under control, that part of my business under control.
To qualify, I think it's more the idea of someone copying me that's what bothers me. It just seems unnatural.
Imitation is the most sincere form of flattery.
It is, but I've never like deliberately gone out and looked at someone and said, "Man, I want to do what they're doing." No, I've always wanted to. I want to do what Brandon wants to do.
I do want to do what Helmut Newton did, but anyway,
I want to be as creative as Helmut Newton, but I don't want to do what he did.
Well, he was a borderline pervert, but.
They all were prior to the 2000 era. They all were. It just came with it. Salvador Dali.
Oh yeah.
Salvador Dali talked about how he like emotionally abused his partner and loved it. He'd bring her to the point of tears because it was cathartic for him to a point. I think there was one painting that was inspired by him walking by a dead mule in the streets. And to better inspire him and to better like get an idea of what he wanted to paint around this dead mule that he walked by, he went home, got a spoon, came back, and carved out its eye in person. And we're all here looking at Salvador Dali like in his underwear painting in a river and like, oh, Dali's such a screwball. No, they're all nuts. They're literally all nuts.
I totally agree with that. So like I had a conversation with a photographer the other day, and she was just like, she's like, oh, why do I hate all these like people that make great work? And sometimes art has to come from a dark place. Sometimes you have to suffer to create good art. We're not all tuned the same way. And I look at it with music. Most of the artists that I love listening to in their personal lives, they're all assholes. Like, all assholes. Like, I would have the most boring taste in music if I had to have a purity test that every musical artist had to pass in order for me to listen to their music. It's like I'm not listening to them because they're a great dad or they're a great husband or whatever. I'm listening to them because they know how to write good music. And I hate to burst the bubble of anyone listening who's younger, but most of your heroes are tortured and terrible people. All right, now that I got out of the way.
Yeah.
Seriously, like I look, well, and then you get into like, this stuff like, I don't want to get too into a political rant here, and I'm not going to.
We're towing the line here.
Well, the thing is they're like, well, I found out that so-and-so holds this belief and therefore I can't support their work anymore. Like I had beliefs when I was in my late teens, early 20s that I don't hold today. And so, if I have to pass, down the road, I mean, I didn't do anything like crazy or anything. I just had these beliefs of the world that were misguided because I wasn't old enough to have experienced the world enough and come to my own conclusions. And then when you start seeing people in other walks of life and seeing other cultures and all that, you're like, oh, hey, I was wrong on that. And there's nothing wrong with evolving. And that's what I did. I evolved. But if my entire life I had to be held to this standard, and if I ever violated that standard at any point in time, I could no longer have things like a career or no longer have the freedom to do other things. As long as I don't like put somebody's life in jeopardy or do something bad to somebody, I don't think that the punishment should be that like I should no longer live my life. It's like, are we gonna we're gonna execute somebody because they made some off the cuff remark in a business place or something like that? Like you can no longer have a life. Like you have to sell your house. You have to like you have to get fired from your job. It's like if you do something that lands you in jail, that's a completely different thing. The law sees that you should go to jail. So yes, that makes sense. But I just think that we push that a bit too far sometimes in our society.
Yeah, and speaking of society, our society is extremely uncomfortable with asking for help. especially in the creative world. A lot of people are timid. And, you can get into a lot of conversations in person with fellow photographers or on Instagram, which is more commonplace for me because I'm constantly busy editing in cafes and don't get out quite nearly as much as I'd like to. But I think it's important as someone in a creative field, specifically photography, I think it's really important for them to ask for help or to ask where that location is, or to ask, how you shot this photo, to ask, how you got this done, what props you use, how you made that set and everything. And there's no shame in it, and there's no hurt that should come from it, because if you're asking, that means that you're trying to grow, you are trying to expand, you don't know how to get there. Because after all, most of photography is stored knowledge in your mind. It's all just what you see, and you want to learn to see differently because most of it's intangible.
You are listening to the F11 Photography Podcast.
Not to get morbid, but once you get to the other side of 40, they joke, oh, you're over the hill, you're on the other side of your life. And it's like, yeah, I am. So like I have less time than I used to, and I have this finite time. And so, I want to ask, because it's like, hey, I need to get from point A to point B. Hey, how did you do this? I'm doing another project that kind of borrows off this vibe. I just want to know how you do this. And there is no shame in doing it. And I'm always happy when people reach out to me. I'm always like, people ask me to evaluate my own work. I'm always like, kind of like, oh, I'm okay. But like, I guess I'm at least good enough objectively to where people reach out to me to want to assist me. Like, and I always feel weird about it because I don't have like a paid internship position available, but they're always like, no, I'll do it for free. I just want to learn. And, I was originally like uncomfortable about it, but then I start thinking about like almost all the photographers that I admire. Most of them have similar stories. Like, yeah, I just like walked onto a set and started assisting for free and all that. And then you also think about the cost of a 4-year education at a university for photography and how much that costs. I mean, they're paying money for that. They're not paying anything. They're just paying for it in time, but they're gaining knowledge. And as somebody who has a degree, my minor is photography, and I did the formal route. The experience I got firsthand was much more valuable than the book experience. So my guilt went away on that when people reached out to me and wanted to assist. I was like, sure, but sometimes the assistant thing, like I had another thing that's taught me patience, a story about patience. So I had a photographer, a young and up-and-coming photographer, reach out to me, and they're like, hey, I want to assist you on a shoot. And there was a local vintage boutique, and we were going to do a styled shoot with a really awesome model. And we went into downtown Austin. We did a location shoots. And the assistant was just like, I'll do whatever. He was just super eager, super good kid. And I was like, all right, so, I'm going to have you hold a beauty dish. And if you go look up the windiest days in Austin in 2022, this was the day that we decided to go out with lighting modifiers and all that. 40 mile an hour sustained winds, just insane. And it was like, it was like a 50-degree day, but the wind chill made it like feel like it was 20. Like, it was insane how cold it was. And the assistant was out there holding it down. The model was doing an incredible job. I knew this model was awesome, but like that was the day where I was like, okay, this model can do anything. Like, it was awesome. But one of the things he asked was, oh, can I bring my camera along? And I was like, sure, whatever. But what I didn't realize is like he was taking pictures of the model like in her clothes and stuff, like while she's posing, and the shots when I wasn't using the modifier, and I was just like, oh, that's weird. And then I got home that night, and he posted all the terribly edited pictures on Instagram. And I was just like, I mean, it was like, if you could like check off everything you're not supposed to do.
Yeah, that could drive on a
set, and I was super patient about it. But like, I had a boss at a job once who said, sometimes like when you're faced with a decision, sometimes the best thing you can do is nothing. And I'm like, what? He's like, no. I promise you, like, I will go to my phone and I will look at my phone and I will see like 3 or 4 panic emails that come up, and I just wait an hour. And guess what happens? All those panic emails, the problems end up working themselves out, and they solve the problem. So tying this into my story, I mean, I was naturally not happy about that. I was like, holy shit, man. Like, you came in to assist me on a project, and not only did you take pictures, which I thought maybe he was doing behind the scenes, but then I was like, wait a minute. And then that night, he puts his edits up on of a shoot that I had spent months putting together. But anyway, it gets 3 or 4 likes or whatever, and I think he figured out pretty quickly that, I shouldn't have done that. He never said anything to me, but he never he never reached out to me again. I think he was like dead of embarrassment at that point. But at the end of the day, unfortunately, the guy, really nice guy, ended up drowning in December. So it was, I would have felt guilty, but I would like tore him a new one, and then like he ended up like dying later. I don't know. I'm weird about that kind of stuff, but
it's way too early for this emotional roller coaster.
Yes.
What the hell are you talking about?
Yeah, but anyway, my
he drowned.
No, he drowned. Yeah, he went swimming. I don't want to talk too much about it.
Moral of the story: don't fuck up other people's shoot, because then something really awful might happen.
No. My takeaway was some things aren't worth going after. Like I knew that the reason he did it was because he was so green, he didn't even know he was doing something wrong. Which to me, as experienced as I am, I'm like, what are you doing? I could have tore him a new one. I had every reason to tear him a new one, but. Younger me, 25-year-old version of me. I mean, gosh, he I might have driven him out of photography. I would have been so mad at him. But my takeaway from that is, even though to a lot of people it may not sound like I did the right thing, I feel like I did the right thing, because it's like at the end of the day, this guy's not with us anymore. And so what difference would it have made if I had torn a new one, right? Like I would have just been like, okay, whatever. I made a point. Like I said, he didn't have tons and tons of followers on Instagram. Nobody really saw that work, but he was proud of it because he got to go do a fashion shoot, a professional fashion shoot. And even though he didn't have his stuff hooked up to the flash, he still got the shots. And so, it was just, it's an interesting story, but going back to it though is I did try to teach him everything that I knew, and he did before he passed. I mean, I did see him start to kind of develop his portfolio a little bit. So hopefully, hopefully in his short time on this earth, I made a positive impact on his life, and I guarantee you, if I had torn him a new one, that I mean, he was just a sweet kid, and I don't know, I might have. Younger me would have discouraged him from ever picking up a camera again, because I used to be really, really harsh and to the point, and sometimes I still can be, when I need to, in limited amounts.
Yeah, the most I ever get asked for help is I do get asked to be assisted, and I thought it was interesting that you brought up that that's uncomfortable for you, because it's uncomfortable for me, because in my mind I don't see myself as having that much to offer in a photo shoot. Like I don't see what they're seeing, and so it's usually like I plan on my shoots so that I don't need an assistant. It's
I do too, but here's the thing. Depending on how green they are, like when you do a photo shoot, the things that just feel like a photo shoot to you, you don't realize it because it just becomes part of your habit. You're doing like 1,000 things. And of those 1,000 things, like maybe 500 of them, that person's never experienced or done before. And so you're just like going about doing your photo shoot. You're doing things like, so I talk to myself when I shoot, like I'm talking to myself through my light settings and all that, which is great. If you're trying to learn how to like do a studio session, I would say I'm great in the sense that you can at least hear me talking through what I'm doing.
Oh, you talk out loud?
Yeah, I talk out loud. Now maybe the images will end up sucking. I mean, that's in the eye of the beholder, but know that things are going well. Whereas sometimes we get photographers and it's just dead air. And they're like super uncomfortable. They're like, oh, like, am I doing this right? Am I doing well? And if they just like keep to themselves and they're super introverted when they shoot, which a lot of photographers are, let's just be honest. There's a lot of photographers out there who are weird people. Maybe they have a really great eye, but they suck with people and they suck with business. I can't tell you how many broke photographers I know who are talented, but I do the narration thing because that's how I need to be. I need to narrate myself through a shoot. That's how I get from point A to point B. And it just so happens that one of the benefits is that most models are comfortable with that. But when it comes to assistants, like I said, they see things that you just think are part of your photo shoot. But to them, it's the first time they're ever seeing it. And so they're like, oh, okay, inverse square law. I'm actually seeing him move the lights. And now I'm seeing why this inverse square thing, like every time he doubles the distance, you lose like 75% light. Oh, I'm actually seeing what happens to the hard shadows when you get up closer versus when you pull the light away. Okay, I'm following this now. And it's things you can't even explain. You're just doing. And that's good. But, when it comes to assistants, do you vet your assistants?
What does that even mean?
So, well, I'll tell you exactly what that means. So they say that your industry chooses you, you don't choose your industry. Well, 95% of the people who reach out to me who want to shoot are women. Okay. Even though if I had my person, like I actually go look for men because I think it's just kind of gotten to this point now where even when men look at my Instagram or my website, they see so many shots of women that he doesn't shoot men. If you go to my website, I have it much more evenly, sorted out so you can see that yes, I do shoot men, but I'm very particular about who I want on set with a woman. I mean, because I have done this before where, and this happened once, is I had an assistant on set. So there's etiquette, and we'll do an entire episode on this. But don't tell a model that they look sexy. Don't tell a model that they look hot. Things like that when you're taking their picture. I usually just say gorgeous, or you look, that looks beautiful, or that looks great. You could maybe get away with, oh, that looks hot. Not you look hot, but that looks hot. You might be able to get away with that. But so you get these dudes who, like, the second they see a model, like, whatever, you're doing a shot where she's not wearing a top, but maybe she's covering up with her hands or something, right? Just implied. And they just can't handle themselves. It's like, dude, like, you are in the wrong industry if you cannot, like, handle yourself around a woman. Like this is just business. Like this is just part of the shoot. Like, it's no different. Like, her not wearing a top is no different than what shoes she's wearing, what color gel I decided to use. It's just a check mark on a list of things that I need to do, right? And you just see it happen with sometimes with these assistants. They just can't handle themselves. And so a lot of times when I'm trying an assistant out for the first time, and it's a guy assistant, I think it's funny. The models who reach out to me are like 95% women, 5% men, but the assistants who reach out to me are like 95% men and 5% women. Funny how that works. So I do have to vet them. I do have to make sure that they're, not creepy, because it's not just a bad reflection on them. It's a bad reflection on me. It's like, wow, you choose the wrong people, Kevin. And so I have to vet them. So what I do is I'll if I have a new guy, I'll put him on a shoot where I'm shooting another guy, just because I want to see how they kind of are on set a little bit and just see if they're even useful to me. And then I'll try them out with a female model.
If personally, if I thought that someone I was going to bring onto set would be an issue in any way, shape, or form, that they just wouldn't be brought on set. But a lot of the people who ask are people that I already have kind of a relationship with, or know them well enough to where I know that they just would never do that. And a lot of them are already somewhat established photographers in their own right. They're just trying to sharpen iron with iron. And that's the thing. That's why it's so important for other photographers to help provide resources, is because as you get better and better in photography, that learning curve it flattens out, and that means that when you start learning after you get to a certain point, you're going to be fighting for inches and not miles anymore. So
100%. And that's another reason, though, why I'm so generous and teaching people everything I know and sending the ladder back down is because I know that everybody's fighting for inches at that point. And so any knowledge I can give them is appreciated, And it's not just that. I've learned from assistants before. It's not just about me teaching knowledge. And it's not even just about knowledge. It's also about success. Like if you're successful and there's enough to go around, share that success with other people. Like, so let's say you're shooting for a brand or whatever, and you're like, well, I need to be super protective. I don't ever want anybody to shoot for this brand or whatever. I don't want to share my success with my friends. When you share your success with your friends, so inevitably something is going to come up at some point when you cannot shoot for that brand because you're booked, you're out on a family vacation, whatever. You've got reasons why you cannot be there on that date. So rather than just going, sorry, you could be, instead, that person who is the guy who said, sorry, I can't do it, but I have this other photographer I recommend. And now you've just opened up that door and sent the ladder back down for that photographer. And you become more valuable to that brand because that brand says, oh, this photographer does really amazing work for us. And in that unlikely event that they're not available, they have another person that they can recommend. So they're now more valuable to us because they're resourceful in addition to being an awesome photographer. And I personally don't think I'm going to lose that brand. Like from that point onward, they're going to start using the other photographer. I have enough confidence in my own skills that I'm going to maintain that relationship. And, you just do the follow-up like, hey, how did everything go? Just want to make sure, sorry, I'm super busy or whatever, but I know let's do better, not better planning. You don't want to make it sound like it's their fault, but let's try to plan better in the future. There's things that you can do to make sure that you maintain that client. But now that person has that in their portfolio and you're helping elevate their career. And so that's just how I feel about it. And when I was younger, I didn't feel that way about it. So
my answer to that is that a lot of people think that the world revolves around them, myself included. The ego is a powerful thing. But what's really important in going places, even if it's just getting better, is people. You've got all the time in the world to better your own craft and improve yourself and what you're able to do with a camera and editing software and with the light and locations that you have. But you do need other people, and that's how you get ahead in life is through other people. Ask anyone who's in business, they're extroverts by principle. So in terms of passing the ladder back down, you need to develop these relationships. You need to help other people. You do need to ask for help, and you should be giving help to others free of charge, or free of guilt, because that's what's gonna help you in the long run. It's a journey, It's the time-space continuum, Your space and matter going through time, and it's a symbiotic relationship, and you can't do it without other people.
You are listening to the F11 Photography Podcast.
The wedding industry, I think, when it's a well-oiled machine, is a great example of sending the ladder back down, because wedding season, people tend to get married around the same time. Most people get married like in the spring and in the summer. I mean, there are fall weddings and winter weddings, obviously, but most people, if you did a poll, probably want to get married at that time. Well, a lot of photographers are overwhelmed and they have to pass off weddings. A lot of first shooters or second shooters on other weddings, and so it's kind of an incestuous industry. And so there's a lot of the photographers who are smart in that industry do send the letter back down, because guess what? People who get married, they have friends who get married, and people get divorced and then get remarried. And that industry stays very, very well stocked with clients. And so if you're smart, you do send the ladder down in a situation like that. Brandon and I often will talk from the standpoint of portrait/editorial photography, and I just want to try to work in other industries into this, because there are other industries where that's a big deal. I know event photographers in general, people who shoot concerts, there's a lot of that going on. But at the end of the day, you don't want to just be known as a great photographer. It's also nice to be known as a photographer who also is resourceful and helps people out in times of need. A lot of times people just think about, the selfish people think about, well, why do I want to send the letter back down when it's just benefiting that person? It's not benefiting me. I'm just taking care of somebody underneath me. Well, first of all, there's that satisfaction of helping people out. I love mentoring people. I think it's great. But what people don't think about is what could come of that. So when I get a green photographer who reaches out to me that wants to learn something, oftentimes, like after I have that session with them where they assist me and all that, like a month or two later, I look at my inbox blows up and I'm like, what's going on? That photographer's like, hey, I had this gig that fell in my lap. It's too much for me. Like, I can't do it. But I thank you for helping me out 2 months ago, so I'm going to pass it on to you. It's something that they know that they're not qualified to do because, there's when you first start out, you're so green, you really don't know what you're qualified to do. You're just trying to figure out how to learn things like the exposure triangle and all that. Then you get to a point where you're starting to figure it out, and then as you get more and more along on your photography journey, you're very aware of what you can't do, and you know when to turn something down. But they finally get to that point where they start realizing that I'm in over my head. I need to get somebody else involved, and I have on many occasions had people who I've mentored, interns, reach back out to me and go, hey, I have this event at the JW Marriott that's like 8 hours and they need they have all these different types of requirements for it. And I know that I can't do this. And so they hand me business. So let's just summarize on that. You let somebody assist you on a job, hold your light, do something that you didn't have planned out, but helped you out and elevated your shoot. Okay, that in and of itself is a benefit from that. You helped that person grow as a photographer, which should hopefully give you some sense of fulfillment. But then down the road, that same photographer had some gig that was larger than they could handle, and then they gave it to you. So you also made money off of that. And so my point being is, if you believe in karma or whatever, look at what that produced. It elevated a shoot, and it might have even been a paid shoot, that you're doing. So you're making something, you're building your brand there, because let's say you're shooting for a brand and this assistant helped your shoot out in some way that made the shoot better. That strengthens your brand, and that's a good thing. And so, people, as you correctly mentioned, thinks that the world revolves around them, but a lot of times if you make the world not revolve around you and you help others, you end up on the back end getting so many better benefits out of it, and you grow.
That's the wonderful thing is those benefits, they're unexpected, It's you open your email months after an assist, you open your email months after handing someone a client that you just didn't have the time or the equipment at the time to do, and suddenly months down the line you're getting it back, and it comes in all different forms, and it's really exciting when that happens. Yeah, specifically stuff that's happened to me is people that I help, they don't necessarily give me opportunities, they give me connections. That's what more so happens to me is hey, I know this guy who needs a photographer. I don't know what his deal is, but you should get in touch with him.
Absolutely. Just even becoming friends with other photographers, some of your clients and brands and people that you work with ever since we started this podcast have just started following me. Because I'm aware that this person exists, right? And I'm sure that it's the other way. I know that some of the models I've worked with in the past, now that I'm working or talking about doing projects with you, and that's great. You should celebrate that kind of stuff. And to the point I was making earlier about jealousy, when I see somebody take a picture that I wish I had taken, I'm now to the point where I'm happy for them and I root for their success. And you should want those around you to be successful, because if you have a good community, it's the saying that a rising tide lifts all ships. I think I might have butchered that, but basically, if somebody is successful around you and they subscribe to the theory of sending the ladder back down, it could benefit you as well. But if you're closed and you're reserved and you hide your secrets, that's going to be your reputation. And so when it comes time for, let's say a really successful photographer in your area is overbooked and a nice brand reaches out to them, guess who they're not going to call? Guess who they're not going to reach out to? You, because you didn't help them out. You were very cold with how you responded to the exchange of information. And you failed to pick up on the thing that I talked about earlier, which is that everybody knows something that you don't. even green photographers know things about photography that I don't. Like photography, there's so much you can learn in photography. Like I've been doing photography for 20 years, and guess what I still don't know how to do? I don't know how to focus stack because I've never had to do it. I don't shoot any styles of photography that require me to focus stack. So I don't know anything about it. So I'm definitely not going to go around the world thinking that I'm some sort of an expert on it. In my YouTube channel, I don't do any YouTube stuff that requires focus stacking. I don't speak on focus stacking because I stay in my lane. Now, do I need to probably learn that? Yeah, I do, because one of my goals in life is to be a complete photographer, and I do want to learn certain things, even if I don't end up using them, because I just want to know why I like or don't like it. You know, you can't say you don't like something maybe if you never experienced it, right? And so
HDR. Nope, that's not true. I don't like HDR.
You don't like the look of it.
Nope, that's wrong. It was an explosion of a new idea in the early 2000s, and people thought that seeing every bit of data for the sake of reality was right. HDR. Sorry.
There are some, I personally, I'm with you in that I don't shoot HDR and I don't particularly like it. I've done some landscapes with HDR, and it looked pretty interesting, but I do know some landscape photographers who shoot in HDR, and it looks pretty fantastic to me. And they're very successful, and they do really well with it. So, you know, it's subjective. You know, I personally, once again, old man, I used to shoot on film. You get what you get out of it, and that's it. Go buy equipment that has good dynamic range. That's
pretty much it. Yeah.
You know, you want to know how you don't need to do HDR? Go buy a Fuji GFX 100S. And then you know how to do HDR.
Gorgeous.
That camera, so I shoot in the studio and I shoot on location, you know, models, portraits, and I have my custom buttons set up to where I have this thing where I toggle, because if you're listening and you have a mirrorless camera, you should know that mirrorless cameras have like an exposure preview. So if you're shooting at like 2.8 and then you open up your aperture to f1.4, you should see your screen on the back get lighter if you're doing exposure simulation, because it's like, oh, this is about what the exposure is going to look like. Now, it doesn't account for flash, but if you're just doing like natural lighting, it's like, this is about what your shot's going to look like at 1.4. So maybe you need to back off your shutter speed or whatever to, you know, or maybe lower your ISO to get the shot back where it needs to be. And sometimes I forget to turn that off. So when you're in the studio, you have to turn that setting off, because the studio, you have to turn that setting off because your camera doesn't know what the flash is going to do. And so you just have to turn it off, and you just want your screen to be as bright as possible so you can see the subject and you can light them up. Well, sometimes I'll do a session at my studio and then we'll go outside and shoot. And I totally forgot to turn that setting off. And so it was like it was reading like it was perfectly exposed, but it was like way underexposed because it was expecting me to hit somebody with a strobe. And I went out and I shot my GFX 100S, 5 stops completely underexposed. The picture would basically look black. And I just went in and I turned the exposure up and I raised the shadows, and it looked every bit as good as a shot from a normal camera. I mean, if you zoomed in and pixel peeped, you could see a tiny bit of noise and grain, but it was so good that the model like put it on their Instagram. They're like, oh, this looks amazing. And it's in their portfolio. So I'm like, okay, yay.
That's just so beyond what every photographer knows about photography. They just shoot 5 stops underexposed and you just drag that shadows lever all the way up.
You know, I used to always, if you go check out my YouTube channel, my reviews are for the most part non-technical. I'm always like, hey, let's go look at 2 years of my work taken with this lens, because that's really all I care about is how does it look? What can I do with it? Because looking at charts and pixel peeping and all that, like, you don't accomplish much. However, the one test I always used to laugh at is, well, here's what happens when you underexpose at 5 stops or overexpose at 5 stops and they try to recover it. And I was like, those tests are so stupid. And here I am telling a story about how it saved my ass. So, wow. Go figure. But anyway, I just want to summarize in today's episode. If you're listening, you know, do not be that person. I implore you, do not be that person who doesn't want to share their secrets, doesn't want to share their locations, doesn't want to share their success, doesn't want to share their experience and their knowledge. Because when you leave this earth, you know, it's great that people think that you're a great photographer, but they should also think of you as a great person. And that does it for today's episode.
Oh,
Okay. Yeah. So we're gonna have some cool episodes coming up here soon. We're gonna be doing an episode on models soon. We'll be doing an episode on self-development, how to develop as a photographer. We've got some future episodes planned with some guests. We'll talk about retouching. We'll talk about things like fine art photography. And so we really do want you to stick around for those. We appreciate your support. And you can check us out at f11.com. Our handle on Instagram and Twitter is also f11. And until next time, chase light, not out. I fucked that up. Chase light, not algorithms.
Thank you for listening to today's episode.
For more information about this podcast, go to www.f11pod.com.